welcome. This is part 3 of Wicked, and today we are starting at the chapter The Cradling Glassblower on page 32. For one short, wet month, early in the next year, the drought lifted, spring tipped in like green well water, frothing at the hedges, bubbling at the roadside, splashing from the cottage roof of garlands of ivy and stringflower. Melina went about the yard in a state of mild undress, so that she could feel the sun on her pale skin and the deep warmth she had missed all winter. Strapped in her chair in the doorway, Elphaba, now a year and a half old, hid her breakfast minnow with the bowl of her spoon. "Oh, eat the thing, don't mash it," said Melina, but mildly. Since the child's chin sling had been removed, mother and daughter had begun to pay some attention to each other. To her surprise, Melina sometimes found Elphaba endearing, the way a baby should be. This view was the only thing she had seen since leaving the elegant mansion of her family, the only thing she would ever gaze upon again. The wind-swept surface of Vale's water, the distant dark stone cottages and chimneys of rush margins on the other side, the hills lying in the torpor beyond. She would go mad. The world was nothing but water and want. If a frolic of elves scampered through the yard, she would leap on them for company, for sex, for murder. "Your father is a fraud," she said to Elphaba, "off finding himself all winter, leaving me with only you for company. Eat that breakfast, for you'll get no more if you throw it on the ground." Elphaba picked up the fish and threw it on the ground. "Your father is a charlatan," continued Melina. "He used to be very good in bed for a religious man, and this is how I know his secret. Holy men are supposed to be above earthly pleasures, but your father enjoyed his midnight wrestling. Once upon a time, we must never tell him we know he's a humbug. It would break his heart. We don't want to break his heart, do we?" And then Melina burst into a high peal of laughter. Elphaba's face was unsmiling, unchanging. She pointed to the fish. "Breakfast. Breakfast in the dirt. Breakfast for the bugs," Melina said. She dropped the collar of her spring robe a little lower, and the pink yoke of her bare shoulders gyrated. "Shall we go walk by the edge of the lake today, and maybe you'll drown?" But Elphaba would never drown. Never, because she would not go near the lake. "Maybe we'll go out in a boat and tip over," Melina shrieked. Elphaba cocked her head to one side as if listening for some part of her mother not intoxicated with leaves and wine. The sun swept out from behind a cloud. Elphaba scowled. Melina's robe dropped lower. Her breast worked her way out from between the dirty ruffles of the collar. "Look at me," thought Melina, showing my breast to the child I couldn't give milk to for fear of amputation. I, who was the rose of Nest Hardings. I, who was the beauty of my generation. And now I am reduced to company I don't even want. My own squirming, thorny little girl. She is more grasshopper than girl, with those angular little thighs, those arching eyebrows, those poking fingers. She's about the business of learning like any child, but she takes no delight in the world. She pushes and breaks and nibbles on things without any pleasure, as if she has a mission to taste and measure all the disappointments of life, in which rush margins is amply supplied. Mercy for the unnamed God. She's a creep. She is. She is. Or we might take a walk in the woods today and pick the last of the winter berries. Melina was full of guilt at her lack of motherly feeling. "We can put them in the pie." "Can we put them in a pie? Shall we, honey?" Elphaba didn't speak, but she nodded and began to wiggle to get down. Melina started a clapping game. Elphaba took no notice of. The child grunted and pointed to the ground, and now arched her long, elegant legs to illustrate desire. Then she gestured to the gate leading from the kitchen garden and the hen yard. There was a man at the uprights of the gate, leaning, shy and hungry looking, with skin the color of roses at twilight, a dusky, shadowy red. He had a couple of leathern satchels on his shoulders and back, and a walking staff, and a dangerously handsome, hollow-looking face. Melina screeched and caught herself, directed her voice to a lower register. It had been so long since she had spoken to anyone but a whining toddler. "Good glory, you startled us," she cried. "Are you searching for some breakfast?" She had lost the social touch. For instance, her breast should not be staring at him so, yet she did not clasp her gown. "Please to forgive a sudden appearance by a strange foreigner at a lady's gate," said the man. "Forgiven, of course," she said impatiently. "Come in where I can see you. Come in, come in." Elphaba had seen so few other people in her life that she hid one eye behind her spoon and peeked with the other eye. The man approached. His movements showed the clumsiness of exhaustion. He was large of ankle and thick of foot, slender about the waist and shoulders and thick again in the neck, as if he had been made on the lathe, and worked too briskly at the extremities. His hands, letting down the satchels, seemed like beasts with minds of their own. They were outsized and splendid. "Traveler not know where he is," said the man. "2 nights to cross the hills from downhill cornings, to look for the inn at 3 dead trees, to rest." "You're lost, you feared," said Melina, deciding not to be perplexed at his scrambled words. "No matter. Let me fix you a meal and you can tell me your story." Her hands were at her hair, which once used to be thought precious as spun brass. At least it was clean. The man was sleek and fit. When he removed his cap, his hair fell out in greasy hanks, sunset red. He washed at the pump, stripping off his shirt, and Melina noticed it was nice to see a waist on a man again. Frex, bless him, had run to plumpness in the year and some since Elphaba's birth. "We're all Quaidlings, this delicious dusty rose color." The man's name, Melina learned, was Turtleheart, and he was a glass blower from Ovels in a little-known Quaidling country. She bundled up her breast at last reluctantly. Elphaba squawked to be let loose, and without so much as flinching, the visitor unbuckled her and swept her in the air and caught her again. The child growled with surprise and even delight, and Turtleheart repeated the trick. Melina took advantage of his concentration on the brat to scoop up the honey and minnow from the dirt and rinse it off. She plopped it among the eggs and smashed tar root, hoping that Elphaba would not suddenly learn to speak and embarrass her. It would be just like the child to do that. But Elphaba was too charmed by this man to fuss or complain. She didn't even whine when Turtleheart finally came to the bench and sat to eat. She crawled between his sleek, hairless calves, for he had chucked off his leggings. As she moaned some private tune with a satisfied smirk on her face, Melina found herself jealous of a female not yet 2 years old. She wouldn't have minded sitting on the ground between Turtleheart's legs. "I've never met a Quaidling before," she said, too loudly, too brightly. The months of solitude had made her forget her manners. "My family would never have Quaidlings in to dine. Not that there were many, or even any for all I know, in the farmlands around my family's estate. The stories make out that Quaidlings were sneaky and incapable of telling the truth." "How can a Quaidling answer to such a charge if a Quaidling is given always to lie?" He smiled at her. She melted like butter on warm bread. "I'll believe anything you say." He told her of the life in the outreaches of Ovels, the houses rotting gently into the swamp, the harvest of snails and milkweed, the customs of communal living and ancestor worship. So you believe your ancestors are with you? She prodded. I don't mean to be nosy, but I have become interested in religion despite myself. Does Lady to believe ancestors are with her? She could hardly focus on the question, so bright were his eyes and so wonderful it was to be called Lady. Her shoulders straightened. My immediate ancestors couldn't be farther away, she admitted. I mean, my parents. They're still living, but so uninteresting to me they might as well be dead. When dead, they may to visit Lady often. They are not welcome. Go away, she laughed, shooing. You mean ghosts? They'd better not. That's what I'd call the worst of both worlds, if there's another land. There is another land, he said with certainty. She felt chilled. She scooped Elphaba up and hugged her tightly. Elphaba sagged as if boneless in her arms, neither fussing nor returning to the hug, just falling limp from the novelty of being touched. Are you a seer? Said Melina. Turtle heart to blow glass, he said. He seemed to mean that as an answer. Melina was suddenly reminded of the dreams she used to have of exotic places she knew was too dull to invent. Married to a minister, and I don't know that I believe in another world, she admitted. She hadn't meant to say that she was married, although she supposed the child implicated her. But Turtle Heart had finished talking. He put down his plate. He had left the minnow, and he took from his satchels a small pot, a pipe, and some sacks of sand and soda ash and lime and other minerals. My Turtle Heart to thank Lady for her welcome? He asked. She nodded. He built up the kitchen fire and sorted and mixed his ingredients and arranged utensils and cleaned the bowl of his pipe with a special rag, folded in its own pouch. Elphaba sat crump-like, her green hands on her green toes, curiosity on her sharp-pinched face. Melina had never seen glass blown, just as she had never seen paper made, cloth woven, or logs hewn from tree trunks. It seemed as marvelous to her as the local stories of the traveling clock that had hexed her husband into a professional paralysis from which he still hadn't quite escaped, though he tried. Turtle Heart hummed a note through his nose or the pipe as he blew an irregular bulb of hot greenish ice. It steamed and hissed in the air. He knew what to do with it. He was the wizard of glass. Melina had to hold Elphaba back to keep her from burning her hands as she reached for it. In what seemed like no time at all, in what felt like magic, the glass had gone from being semi-liquid and abstract to a hardening, cooling reality. It was a smooth, impure circle, like a slightly oblong plate. All the while Turtle Heart worked with it, Melina thought of her own character, going from youthful ether to hardening shell, transparently empty, breakable too. But before she could lose herself in remorse, Turtle Heart took her two hands and passed them near, but not touching the flat surface of the glass. Lady to talk with ancestors, he said, but she would not struggle to connect with old boring dead people in the other land, not when his huge hands covered hers. She breathed through her nose to suppress the smell of breakfast in an unwashed mouth. Fruit and one glass of wine, or was it two? She thought she might well faint. Looking glass, he urged her. She could only look at his neck and his raspberry honey-colored chin. He looked for her. Elphaba came and steadied herself with a small hand on his knee and peered in too. Husband is near, said Turtle Heart. Was this prophecy through a glass dish, or was he asking her a question? But he went on. Husband is traveling on a donkey and to bring elderly woman to visit you. Is ancestor to visit? Is old. Nursemaid, probably, Melina said. She was slopping downward into his crippled syntax in unabashed sympathy. Can you really see that in there? He nodded. Elphaba nodded too. But at what? How much time do we have before he gets here? She asked. Till this evening. They did not speak another word until sunset. They banged the fire and hooked Elphaba into a harness and sat her down in front of the cooling glass, which they hung on a string like a lens or a mirror. It seemed to mesmerize and calm her. She did not even gnaw absentmindedly at her wrists or toes. They left the door to the cottage open so that from time to time they could peer out from the bed to check on the child who, in the glare of the sunny day, would not be able to focus her eyes to see in the house shadows, and who anyway never turned to look. Turtleheart was unbearably beautiful. Melina dragon-snaked with him, covered him with her mouth, poured him in her hands, heated and cooled and shaped his luminosity. He filled her emptiness. They were washed and dressed, with supper mostly made, when a donkey brayed a half-mile down the lake. Melina blushed. Turtleheart was back at the pipe, blowing again. Elphaba turned and looked in the direction of the donkey's serrated statement. Her lips, which always looked almost black against the new apple color of her skin, twisted tight, chewed against each other. She bit her lower lip as if thinking, but she did not bleed. She had learned to manage the teeth somewhat. Through trial and error, she put her hand on the shining disk. The glass circlet caught the last blue of the sky, until it looked like a magic mirror showing nothing but silver cold water within. Geographies of the seen and the unseen. All the way from Stone's Bar End, where Frex met her coach, Nanny complained. Lumbago, weak kidneys, fallen arches, aching gums, sore hunches. Frex wanted to say, and how about your soul and ego? Though he had been out of circulation for a while, he knew such a remark would be rude. Nanny flounced and petted herself, clinging determinedly to her seat until they arrived at the lodge near Rush Margins. Melina greeted Frex with affecting shyness. My breastplate, my backbone, she murmured. She was slender after a hard winter. Her cheekbones were more prominent. Her skin looked scoured, as if by an artist's scratch brush. But she had always had the look of an etching in the flesh. She was usually bold with her kisses, and he found her reticence alarming until he realized there was a stranger in the shadows. Then, after introductions, Nanny and Melina fussed to get a meal on the table, and Frex put out some oats for the sorry nag who had to pull the carriage. When this was done, he went to sit in the spring evening light and to meet his daughter again. Elphaba was cautious around him. He fought in his pouch a trinket he'd whittled for her, a little sparrow with a cunning beak and upraised wings. Look, Babala, he whispered. Melina hated the derivative, so he used it. And it was his and Elphaba's private bond, the father-daughter pact against the world. Look what I found in the forest, a little maple wood bird. The child took the thing in her hands. She touched it softly and put its head in their mouth. Frex steeled himself to hear the inedible splinting and to hold back his sigh of disappointment. But Elphaba did not bite. She sucked the head and looked at it, wet, and had a greater life. You like it, Frex said. She nodded and began to feel its wings. Now that she was distracted, Frex could draw her between his knees. He nuzzled his crinkly bearded chin to her hair. She smelled like soap and wood smoke, and the char of the toast, a good healthy smell, and he closed his eyes. It was good to be home. He had spent the winter in an abandoned shepherd's hut on the windward slope of Griffin's Head, praying and fasting, moving deeper inside and then further outside himself. And why not? At home, he had felt the scorn of the people of the whole claustrophobic valley of Illswater. They had connected the Time Dragon's slanderous story of a corrupt minister with the arrival of a deformed child. They had drawn their own conclusions. They avoided his chapel services, so a sort of hermit's life, at least in small intervals, had seemed both penance and preparation for something else. Something next. But what? He knew his life wasn't what Melina had originally expected of marrying him. With his bloodlines, Frex had looked primed for an elevation to proctor, or even eventually bishop. He had imagined the happenings Melina would have as a society dame, presiding over feast state dinners and charity balls, and episcopal teas. Instead, he could see her in the firelight, grating a last limp winter carrot onto a pan of fish. Here she wasted away, a partner in a difficult marriage on a cold, shadowy lake shore. Frex had a notion that she wasn't sorry to see him go off from time to time, so that she could be glad to see him come back. As he ruminated, his beard tickled Elphaba's neck, and she snapped the wings off the wooden sparrow. She sucked on it like a whistle, twisting away from him. She ran to a glass lens hanging from the projecting eave and swatted at it. "Don't, you'll break that," said her father. She could not break that. The traveler, the quaidling, came from the sink where he had been washing up. She just turned her toy into a cripple, Frex said, pointing at the ruined birdling. "She is herself pleased at that half things," Turtleheart said. "I think the little girl to play with the broken pieces better." Frex didn't quite get it, but nodded. He knew that months away from the human voice made him clumsy at first. The boy from the inn, who had climbed Griffin's Head to deliver Nanny's request to be picked up at the Stone Spar's end, had obviously thought Frex a wild man, grunting and unkempt. Frex had to quote a little of the Osiad to indicate some sort of humanity. Land of green abandon, land of endless leaf. It was all he would come to him. "Why can't you break it?" asked Frex. "Because I do not make it to be broken," answered Turtleheart, but he smiled at Frex, not aggressively. And Elphaba wandered around with her shiny glass as if it were a toy, catching shadows, reflections, lights on its imperfect surface, almost as if she were playing. "Where are you going?" asked Frex, just as Turtleheart was saying, "Where are you from?" "I'm a Munchkinlander," said Frex. "I think all Munchkins to be shorter than I or you." "The peasants, the farmers, yes," Frex said, "but anyone with bloodlines worth tracing married into the heights somewhere along the way. And you? You're from Quaidling Country." "Yes," said Quaidling. His reddish hair had been washed and was drying into airy nimbus. Frex was glad to see Melina so generous as to offer a passerby water to bathe in. Perhaps she was adjusting to a country life after all, because, mercy, a Quaidling ranked about as low on a social ladder as it was possible to get and still be human. "But I to understand," said the Quaidling. "Ovals is a small world until I to leave. I am not known of hills, one beyond the other, and from the spiny backbones a world so wide round. The blurry far away to hurt my eyes, for I cannot make it seem. Please, sir, to describe the world you know." Frex picked up a stick in the soil and he drew an egg on its side. "What they taught me in lessons," he said. "Inside the circle is Oz. Make an X." He did so, through the oval, full of cities. "And roughly speaking, you have a pie in 4 sections. The top is Gilliking, full of cities and universities and theaters, civilized life, they say. and industry. He moved clockwise. East is Munchkinland, where we are now. Farmland, the breadbasket of Oz. Except down in the mountains south, these strokes in the district of Wen Hardings are the hills you're climbing. He bumped and squiggled. Directly south of the center of Oz is cradling country. Badlands, I'm told. Marshy, useless, infested with bugs and feverish hares. Turtleheart looked puzzled at this, but nodded. Then west, what they call Winky Country. Don't know much about that except it's dry and unpopulated. And around, said Turtleheart, sandstone deserts, north and west. Flagstone Desert east and south. They used to say the desert sands were deadly poison. That's just standard propaganda. Keeps invaders from Ev and Quox from trying to get in. Munchkinland is rich and desirable farming territory, and Gillikin's not bad either. In the Gicklus, up here, he scratched lines in the northeast on the border between Gillikin and Munchkinland, are the emerald mines and the famous Glickus canals. I gather there's a dispute whether the Glickus is Munchkinlander or Gillikinese, but I have no opinion on that. Turtleheart moved his hands over the drawing in the dirt, flexing his palms as if he were reading the map from above. But here, he said, what is here? Rex wondered if he meant the air above Oz, the realm of the unnamed god, he said. The other land? Are you a unionist? Turtleheart is glassblower, said Turtleheart. I mean religiously. Turtleheart bowed his head and didn't meet Rex's eye. Turtleheart is not to know what name to call this. I don't know about Quadlings, said Rex, warming to a possible convert. But Gillikinese and Munchkinlanders are largely unionist, since learnedist paganism went out. For centuries there have been unionist shrines and chapels all over Oz. Are they none in Cradling Country? Turtleheart does not recognize what is this, he said, and now respectable unionists are going in droves over to the pleasure faith, said Rex, snorting, or even TikTokism, which hardly even qualifies as a religion. To the ignorant, everything is a spectacle these days. The ancient unionists, monks, and mounts knew their place in the universe, acknowledging their life source too sublime to be named. And now we sniff up the skirts of every musty magician who comes along. Hedonist, anarchist, solipsist. Individual freedom and amusement is all. As if sorcery had any moral component, charms, alley magic, industrial strength sound and light displays, fake shape changers, charlatans, nabobs of necromancy, chemical and nerval wisdoms, humbug headed hedonists. Sailing their bog recipes and crone aphorisms and schoolboy spells. It makes me sick. Turtleheart said, Shall Turtleheart bring you water? Shall Turtleheart lie with you down? He put fingers soft as calfskin on the side of Rex's neck. Rex shivered and realized he had been shouting. Nanny and Melina were standing in the doorway with the pan of fish, silent. It's a figure of speech. I'm not sick, he said. But he was touched at the concern the foreigner had shown. I think we'll eat. And they did. Elphaba ignored her food except to prod the eyes out of the baked fish and to try to fit them into her ringless word. Nanny grumbled good-naturedly about the wind of the lake, her chills, her backbone, her digestion. Her gas was apparent from more than a few feet away, and Rex moved as discreetly as possible to be upwind. He found himself sitting next to the Quadling on the bench. So is all that clear to you? Rex pointed a fork at the map of Oz. Is the Emerald City to be where? Said Quadling, fish bones poking out from between his lips. Dead center, Frex said. And there is Ozma, said Turtleheart. Ozma, the ordained Queen of Oz, or so they say, Frex said. Through the unnamed god must be the ruler of all in our hearts. How can unnamed creature to rule? Began Turtleheart. No theology at dinner, sang out Melina. That's a house rule dating from the start of our marriage, Turtleheart, and we obey it. Besides, I still harbor devotion to Lurleen. Nanny made a face in Frex's direction. Old folks like me are allowed to. Do you know about Lurleen Stranger? Turtleheart shook his head. If we have no theology, then we surely have no arrant pagan nonsense, began Frex. But Nanny, being a guest and invoking a touch of deafness when it suited her, plowed on. Lurleen is the fairy queen who flew over the sandy wastes and spotted the green and lovely land of Oz below. She left her daughter Ozma to rule the country in her absence, and she promised to return to Oz in its darkest hour. Ha, said Frex. No babs at me, Nanny sniffed. I'm as entitled to my beliefs as you are, Frex barred the godly. At least they don't get me into trouble as yours do. Nanny, govern your temper, said Melina, enjoying this. It's rubbish, said Frex. Ozma rules in the Emerald City, and anyone who's seen her or paintings of her knows that she's from Gilliganese stock. She's got the same broad bond of forehead, the slightly gaped front teeth, the frenzy of curling blonde hair, the quick shifts of mood, usually into anger, all characteristic of Gilliganese peoples. You've seen her, Melina. Tell him. Oh, she is elegant in her way, Melina admitted. The daughter of a fairy queen, said Turtleheart. More nonsense, said Frex. Not nonsense, snapped Nanny. They think she bears herself again and again like a phoenix, said Frex. Ha and double ha. They've been 300 years of very different Ozmas. Ozma the Mendacious was dedicated mount, who lowered rulings into a bucket down to the topmost chamber in a cloister tower. She was mad as a bung beetle. Ozma the warrior conquered the Gluckas, at least for a time, and commandeered the emeralds with which to decorate the Emerald City. Ozma the librarian did nothing but read genealogies for her whole life long. Then there was Ozma, the scarcely beloved who kept pet enemies. She overtaxed the farmers to begin the much road system of yellow brick that they're still struggling to complete, and much luck to them, I say. Who is Ozma now? Asked Turtleheart. Actually, said Melina, I had the pleasure to meet the last Ozma at a social season in the Emerald City. My grandfather, the Himinanthrope, had a townhouse. The winter I was 15, I was brought out into society there. She was Ozma the bilious, because of a bad stomach. She was the size of a lake narwhal, but she dressed beautifully. I saw her with her husband, Pistorius, at the Oz Festival of Song and Sentiment. She is no longer the queen, asked Turtleheart, confused. She died in an unfortunate accident involving some rat poison, said Frex. Died, said Nanny, or her spirit moved into her child, Ozma Tippertarius. The current Ozma is just about the age of Elphaba, said Melina. So her father, Pistorius, is Ozma regent. The good man will rule until Ozma Tiberius is old enough to take the throne. Turtleheart shook his head. Frex was annoyed because he had spent so much time talking about the worldly ruler and ignored the eternal realm. And Nanny lapsed into a bout of indigestion for which they all were very sorry, olfactorily speaking. Anyway, even being irritated, Frex was glad to be home. Because of the beauty of Melina, she was almost glowing tonight as if the sun left her sky. And because of the surprise of Turtleheart, smiling and unconsciously next to him, maybe because of Turtleheart's religious emptiness, which Frex found challenging and appealing, almost tempting. Then there's a dragon beneath Oz, in a hidden cavern. Nanny, who was saying to Turtleheart, "The dragon who has dreamt the world and who will burn it in flames when he awakes." "Shut up, that superstitious codswallop," shouted Frex. Elphaba, on all fours, advanced on the uneven planks of the flooring. She bared her teeth as if she knew what a dragon was, and as if she were pretending, and roared. Her green skin made them more persuasive, and as if she were a dragon child. She roared again. "Oh, sweetheart, don't," said Frex, and she peed on the floor and sniffed her urine with satisfaction and disgust.